The following is an Operation Podcast production.
The mitochondria, the first thing that comes to people's mind, right, is powerhouse of the cell, right? It gives our cells the energy and the life force that they need to do their job. Again, whether it's performance or whether it's just promoting longevity, we have to think about these little power packs, these little battery operated, organelles inside our body and how they can help us to thrive. My belief is actually the mitochondria, and mitochondrial health. This is the next, and I hate to call it a trend because that makes it sound not science-backed, but the next wellness trend, when we think about gut health and where that was 10 to 15 years ago, there was incredible science, but the general public 15 years ago didn't really know what gut health was, and now it's everywhere. The science around mitochondrial health and its importance, as you pointed out, not just in performance and, metabolism, but just longevity. The science is incredible and we've barely scratched the surface. And so we're going to be hearing a lot more about it. We're going to be learning more about it, pharmaceuticals and more supplements that are coming out targeting mitochondrial health. So buckle up and get ready for it. There's a lot more to learn and uncover. I'm Jen Scheinman, registered dietitian and senior manager of nutrition affairs at Timeline, and welcome to Ever Forward Radio.
I feel like we can't talk about the mitochondria without first talking about mitophagy. Can you break down for us, what does that mean? How does it happen? How do we accelerate it? How does it get slowed down? And why does mitophagy really matter?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is one of the foundational pieces of mitochondrial health. So I'm going to talk in very simple terms, and then we'll kind of expand from there. But I think of the mitochondria almost as like a little factory, right? It takes raw materials, which is the food that we eat and the air that we breathe, and it goes through a very complex assembly line. And at the end, we get cellular energy, ATP. But just like any other factory, right? What those raw materials are matters. All the ingredients and the workers on that factory matter. And the factory is also itself going to break down with wear and tear as that happens, right? And so there's a lot of things we can do to improve the output of energy, right? We could build new factories, we could add new workers, but at the end of the day, once that factory is sort of dysfunctional, we need to demolish it, recycle it, and then make room, have more real estate to build more of these factories. And so that recycling process I think of as really the foundational to mitochondrial health is that removal of the damaged mitochondria, and that is mitophagy. So mitophagy, I think, people are very familiar with the word autophagy, right? Especially if you talk a lot about fasting and that recycling of the cells. Mitophagy is just a very specific, unique type of autophagy that happens only to the mitochondria. So taking those energy factories, breaking them down, building new, better functioning mitochondria.
What is maybe one way that someone listening right now can take action to help the mitophagy process before we even get into any of the nutritional components, supplementation, or before we even dive into really Urolithin-A? Because there are a few things that we can do immediately to help this process, but I would love to hear you kind of drive these points home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our bodies are just so miraculous, right? That they have these systems in place. So it's happening sort of low grade in the background all the time. But similar to autophagy, there's things you can do that are going to help to upregulate that, right? And the first one is fasting or calorie restriction. So we know that when you do restrict your calories, when you do go through these periods without consuming food, that recycling process is going to rev up. We're going to see more mitophagy happening. The other thing is exercise, right? And different types of exercise are going to impact the mitochondria in different ways. From the way that I've really understood is HIIT exercise seems to be really great for mitophagy, whereas, strength and endurance are better for other performance of mitochondrial health. But any good exercise program is going to be targeting mitochondrial health in some sort of way. So those are the things that, right, there's no replacement for those things. Those things need to be part of any foundational, component. But to that point also, not everybody can or necessarily should fast, especially for extended periods of time. while everybody should exercise, like not everybody does, right? That's a behavior change that takes a lot of work, and we also get busy, and sometimes we go through periods where we're injured or something's happening, right? Where we're just not exercising, we're traveling a ton, we're not doing these things as much as we wish we had the time to do, right? And so it's helpful to know that there's other things that we can do that are going to help to stimulate mitochondrial health, and specifically this recycling mitophagy process.
So the question comes to mind for me, if we know that fasting stimulates mitophagy, and we know that the more mitophagy that we have going on, we have healthier, more productive, even more mitochondria. Do people fast live longer? Do people who fast have healthier lives? Do people who fast have higher quality health span and lifespan? Should everyone be fasting?
I have, well, let me first answer to people like what we know about fasting, right? So in terms of do people live a longer life, this is something that's really hard to measure, right? Because nobody is like starting somebody at birth and following them through their lifespan and tracking their fast. We look at this type of stuff in animal models. A lot of lifespan extension, right, comes from animal models. But we can look at biomarkers and other things that indicate, yeah, this person might live longer or is healthier. A lot of the data on fasting is in people who are metabolically unhealthy. So who are, either with type 2 diabetes or overweight, and we see amazing benefits of fasting. Does that mean that people who are already super active and, fit are not getting benefits? No, they might be as well, but I think it becomes a lot more challenging. If you are an athlete and you require a lot of calories and you require a lot of protein in order to really fuel your workouts, it can be really hard to get all of that when you're fasting. I work specifically really with women who are going through perimenopause right now, and their protein needs are, something that they're increasing at this point in their life, and sometimes it's a real challenge for them when they're fasting to get their protein space throughout the day. So I don't think that fasting as a blanket is for everyone unless you're necessarily like working with someone who can make sure you're getting all of the nutrition that you need. Now, again, as I said, people who are metabolically unhealthy, there might be a case for at least trimming that eating window or playing around with it in some other cases. But even then, I think it's the type of thing that's helpful when done with a professional to kind of make sure that you're still getting all the nutrition that you need. So, and then there's just some people who just don't like it. They're hangry. They're uncomfortable. Like I have some friends that like they fast and they feel amazing. I don't feel amazing when I fast. So I time restrict in the sense that like I don't eat for 12 hours, but I don't usually fast much longer than that. Or, maybe I might do something more extended, like once or twice a year.
Yeah, I feel like we should maybe break down fasting a little bit more, particularly through the lens of what type of fasting, what duration of fasting. Are we talking about that really focuses on mitophagy, that really helps us get this cellular mitochondrial revitalization? Are we talking intermittent fasting? And does that look like a 8-hour window, 12-hour window, 18-hour, 20-hour window? Or is it more once a week, do a 24-hour fast, once a month, do a 2-day fast? What are we really talking about here?
Yeah, so I call time restricted eating like the fasting that's in these sort of short windows, right? Where it's 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours. People play with different windows, right? Then where it's really just a shortened eating window where you are eating, whatever you want. Hopefully it's still healthy, nutritious food, right? But you just maybe 8 hours a day you're eating. And then there are other types of fasting where it's like, I think it's, I only eat one meal a day, or I go a full 24 hours of fasting. For really the autophagy and the mitophagy benefits, it seems that these longer fasts are needed to really turn up the volume on autophagy and mitophagy. So again, these things are always happening in the background.
Yeah, what do you mean by longer fast? How long is a long
fast?
fast?
Say a longer fast, like over 24 hours, really something more like, potentially a 36-hour water fast, or, there's some of these fasting mimic programs where you're eating like, very minuscule quantities of food and almost like tricking your body into being fasted. And those are like 5-day fasts. So Dr. Walter Longo, who does a lot of that research, he really feels that these longer fasts are more beneficial for triggering a lot of this cellular cleanup. The shorter fasts, I think, are fantastic for just helping to sort of regulate, blood glucose levels and sort of hit a little bit of a metabolic reset, and also to allow the gut to rest. So, a 16-hour fast, I think, can have some benefits as well. But we're really talking about that cellular cleanup. the longer fast seems to be more beneficial. And then, of course, you get into that concern of like, well, are you eating enough protein during that, a 3-day fast? Chances are not, right? You're either just on water or you're on a very, very low calorie. And Dr. Walter Longo's work also is usually low protein. So I think if you're considering fasting, it's sort of like, what is your goal? If you're somebody who snacks late at night, sometimes doing a fast is a great way just to like, say I'm not eating at night anymore, right? And that's a great either like weight maintenance tip or just a sort of great way to kind of just keep your blood sugar stable for a little bit of time and rest the gut. If you're really looking for that cellular cleanup, sometimes these longer multi-day fasts or at least a 24-hour fast can be beneficial. And that's where I get even more concerned with meeting nutrition needs, making sure, if you are somebody who is super fit and requires a lot of calories just to do the exercise that they want to do, or you're older and you're trying to maintain muscle mass, that's where I start to get concerned that if you're not thoughtful and intentional, that you could miss out on certain important nutrients and macros.
You mentioned earlier that you work a lot with perimenopause and menopausal women. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So is there more of a benefit for this type of person in this period of their life to consider fasting?
I have really moved away from it in my practice. And this
Really?
is based on my personal practice and not necessarily on science. It's just been sort of my more clinical experience is that I find that women, and I am a midlife woman myself, I'm 49. I find that women of my generation are very much into this sort of like calorie counting, like, almost like an unhealthy sort of like, we grew up in like the Weight Watchers, like everything had points attached
Counting
to it.
points.
Yeah. And so I kind of feel like they're using fasting almost as like a crutch of like controlling what they're eating than really like looking at it as like a health benefit. And a lot of them are really struggling to get as much protein as they need in a day. And so if you're skipping that first meal a day and you're not getting 30 grams of protein in the morning, which we know can help with muscle protein synthesis and just sort of help with setting the stage for the rest of the day, I find that they're just not having as great success as when they really start the day with a protein forward breakfast. So again, that's my own personal clinical practice. That's, different practitioners are going to probably have different things, but I do try to have my clients stop eating, 2 to 3 hours before they're going to bed. And so trying to push that dinner to be maybe a little bit earlier, not an 8 p.m. dinner, trying to get dinner more at like 6:30, and hopefully not snack before they go to bed. So they're getting that rest there and kind of extending that window.
Yeah. Can you go a little bit deeper for us there? Why do you feel it's so important for someone to increase the eating window, or I should say increase the amount of time between their last meal and going to bed? What benefit does that have unique to mitochondrial health?
To mitochondrial health specifically, I think of it, that's a good question, because I think of it more just in terms of like rest and digest and blood sugar and circadian rhythm, which I guess, could all be tied into mitochondrial health as well. But what I find is, a lot of people are sitting and like snacking in front of the TV late night, and there's just really no health benefit to that. B, it just allows the body to fully go into rest and digest mode so that you're not going to bed. And I see this a lot with my clients that are wearing fitness trackers, right? They notice that they get into better quality sleep if they eat earlier in the day, or their dinner earlier, I should say. People who are wearing CGMs might notice that their blood sugar is better regulated overnight. So yeah, I guess that all technically is impacting mitochondrial health, but I'm thinking it more of like a broader lens of just sort of weight management, especially again, midlife women, weight starts to become an issue, and just kind of overall calorie control and blood sugar management.
Yeah, I'm a team Whoop over here, Whoop Physical Activity Tracker, running on almost 5 years of data now. And I've noticed personally that if I eat, and not so much like a snack, but if I have, let's say, a late dinner or a meal, within 30 to 45 minutes of going to bed, it has pretty much every time, it has the same effect on my sleep and recovery in a negative way as if I had a serving of alcohol, a beer or a glass of wine. I see a drop in recovery. I see a drop in sleep score. And so I'm like, wow. You think then you kind of get into this bucket of, oh, well, maybe I need more protein or I need more calories for the day in order to hit my calorie goal, protein goal, or just I'm hungry. Maybe I trained hard or worked hard or I didn't get to eat a lot today, so I'm trying to just get in my fill. But then you're kind of just trading one evil for the other, so to speak. And well, now I get less sleep, and so then I'm not getting as many the regenerative healing benefits from sleep. I'm waking up a little bit more groggy the next day. I can't quite get after it the next day, and so it's really eye-opening. And so I can just personally attest to, the larger the window I have from my last meal to when I go to bed, the better my sleep, the better my recovery.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. I see that in myself. I see that in my clients, and sometimes, it's just life gets in the way and you can't do that. But, if you live in an area where you can walk at night, I know we're getting into the season where it's dark, but even like a 10-minute walk after you eat can do wonders for like bringing down your glucose levels and just kind of helping to move things along and sort of, the GI tract, and kind of that can be sort of a little Band-Aid if you do eat later than you really intended to.
Yeah. So let's shift into something that I have talked about on my show for a couple of years now, but I would really love to have you unpack Urolithin-A, this post-biotic material that we are seeing have so many profound health benefits for damn near every age group, physically active, inactive. In fact, some of the most astounding science I'm seeing come out in terms of increase in muscle strength and endurance was tested in physically inactive people, which blows my mind. I'm like, how can someone who is not training regularly have an increase in muscle strength and endurance? You would think you would need to train more. But what is Urolithin-A? And just high level, why does it matter for everyone before we kind of get into the weeds?
Yeah, so you hit the nail on the head when you said it's a postbiotic nutrient. So, I mentioned gut health in the beginning of this podcast and how everybody is so sort of like knowledgeable about gut health. But I think one area where people are not quite as knowledgeable yet is this role of postbiotics, right? That is what our gut microbiome, these bacteria in our gut, one of the many benefits is they create these molecules. I like to say we give them room and board. These little critters live inside us. They get to eat the things we can't digest and absorb, right? So fiber is one of those things. Polyphenols, which are these plant chemicals that are so health promoting, we can't absorb all of those. And so our gut does that job for us. Our gut microbiome does that job for us. And they pay us with these molecules that are so beneficial. And B vitamins, some B vitamins are postbiotics. Vitamin K, we get them obviously through food as well, but our gut also produces these. So those are more commonly known postbiotics. Short chain fatty acids like butyrate, if you talk ever on your podcast about gut health, like those are really well known postbiotics. And so this molecule Urolithin-A is, and I don't even want to say it's a newly discovered, because actually the research has been, at least 15 years, but it's getting more, because there is actually now consumer-facing products that contain Urolithin-A. I think people are hearing a lot more about it over the course of the past couple of years. But it's been an extensively researched postbiotic that triggers that recycling process of the mitochondria, that mitophagy. And the thing that's so unique is there's a lot of things out there that will help mitochondrial health in different ways, but the only external molecule to date that's been proven in humans, so in clinical trials in human beings, so besides fasting, besides exercise, the only other thing you can do is Urolithin-A is going to upregulate that process. So it's really unique. And when you think about that foundation of how you take care of your mitochondria, that's why it's really just such an interesting and important molecule to explore.
I want to share with my audience, and I know you're very aware of this study, the one that I was kind of referring to about this increase in strength and endurance in people that aren't strength training or endurance training. And I'm going to have all this information linked down in the show notes for everybody. But, kind of the summary of this study from Cell Reports Medicine is about how Urolithin-A improves muscle strength, exercise performance, and biomarkers of mitochondrial health in a randomized trial in middle-aged adults. And it talks about how the data shows significant improvements in muscle strength. Excuse me, let me go back to the dosing. So they present results from a randomized placebo-controlled trial in middle-aged adults where they administered a postbiotic compound, Urolithin-A, a known mitophagy activator at 2 doses for 4 months. So not a crazy high dose, not a crazy long timeline. And the data showed significant improvements in muscle strength, about 12% with intake of Urolithin-A. They observed clinically meaningful improvements with Urolithin-A on aerobic endurance, measured as peak oxygen consumption, VO2, and physical performance through the 6-minute walk test. So how is it possible that we can take a group of, we'll say here, inactive adults, or we should, I guess, really we're not adding any new training protocol to this group.
Correct.
And we're only introducing one new variable, and that is taking Urolithin-A. How is it possible that we can have an increase in muscle strength and an increase in endurance?
So not only did we not add a new training protocol, there was no training. Like, these were sedentary individuals. So it wasn't like they were active and then we added this. Like, they're, sort of your average American person. They also had a BMI of about 29, right? So they're, overweight. We didn't change diet. So you're absolutely right. Just one variable. And it all comes down to mitochondrial health. So I think one of the things that's important is this isn't like an anabolic type of product where we're seeing muscle growth that's happening, but on the individual muscle cell, you have more energy producer. So of course that cell is going to be able to do its job better. So whether that is walking 6 meters, you can do that better because you have more cellular energy. Whether it is, lifting a weight, you can do that better because those cells have more energy to do their job. So that's really, when you think about the muscle cell, it can have thousands of mitochondria. I think we don't always think about that, right? When I think of high school biology and what I learned about the mitochondria, like you had that like almost cartoon diagram of a cell, right? And there was these two little like bean-shaped mitochondria where the squiggly line. No, we have thousands of mitochondria inside our cells. They talk to each other, which is super cool. They fuse together, and then through a process called fission, they divide apart. And Mitopure Urolithin-A is really helping this whole recycling process. So when you have more life in that cell, it does its job better. And I think for people who can't exercise or looking to improve upon their exercise routine, this is something that I think it can be a real game changer because of what the data is showing.
This analogy comes to mind for me of, imagine we have a rowboat and you've got 12 seats in that rowboat. And for whatever reason, you only got 2 active. So you introduce something like Urolithin-A and it begins to activate all of these other people behind the oars kind of thing. So it's all there. It's almost like we have just so much untapped potential at the cellular level, but it just needs this one ingredient. It needs this one thing to come in to activate all of that potential, quite literally energy potential, to get things going in a much more efficient way. So it's no wonder, we don't need to introduce any new training or any training protocol because all the energy potential is just there waiting for us.
I love that analogy, and we'll be stealing it. I think that's perfect.
Take it.
Yeah. I think that's like a perfect visualization, right? It's either like we're either replacing empty seats, or we're replacing rowers who are not doing their job, or a better coach is coming in and getting them to work better, right? So it's all those things.
Exactly.
And I don't want to say we don't need a training program, because I think in the supplement world, right, people are sometimes looking for quick fixes, right? And, I fully believe as a dietitian, right, like the behaviors, you need a training program, you need an exercise program. This is really just that third pillar of health and wellness, is kind of advanced supplementation that can help take you to the next level. Or I think it's also powerful for people who want to get into an exercise routine, but they get fatigued really easily, especially just even people who, and I say older, I include myself in that, as like I start to get towards 50, like I find that like I do a hard workout and I don't recover the same way that I used to. And so this is a really powerful tool to kind of meet people wherever they are on their fitness journey. So if you're new and you need some support, if you're working out and you kind of want to take it to the next, or you're a performance athlete, this can also help. And we have some really interesting data, specifically, like you had mentioned, our data in our sedentary adults. This is unpublished data that I'm hoping will be published soon, looking in active Olympic trained endurance athletes, because these are people that we think are already doing all the things for their mitochondria, right? They're eating right, they're exercising, but their mitochondria are actually damaged too, because it's almost like overuse. There's so much inflammation that can happen after you do an extreme workout. And so, this study was incredible. As I said, it was done with these Olympic trained endurance athletes. They were at training camp. So food was measured, their exercise was measured, and hooked up to all the, machines to get all of their biometrics. And what the story seems to be there, and we're still sort of analyzing the data, is this recovery. And I hear that all the time. And that's something I've noticed. So what we're seeing is a lot of those inflammatory markers that peak after an intense exercise workout, like C-reactive protein, those are all lowered much more quickly. The runners also noticed like their rate of perceived exertion was improved. So, we're putting them on the same treadmill workout as the group that is getting the placebo, but so they are working as hard, but they don't feel like they are working as hard as the placebo group. So that's more to uncover and unpack when that study gets published and we have more data. But I hear that very often is like, I don't get sore after a workout. This is an anecdotal story, but like I had put my mom on this. She's 75. Well, at the time she was 75 and very fit. She happens to be a personal trainer. She works out with a trainer, but she had to have a back procedure. So she was going to be not working out for 6 weeks. And, as a woman in her 70s, I was really concerned about her muscle loss that was going to happen. So I put her on Urolithin-A, put her on Mitopure. And while she was taking it, she actually didn't feel like she felt anything at first. And then she went back to her gym and went back to her trainer. And she was like, oh my God, I felt as great as I felt like before I went for surgery. I mean, not the pain piece, obviously, but she felt like she didn't have to start over again. She was not sore the next day. She felt like she had a great workout and didn't feel like she was just had to start from the ground floor again. And I hear those types of stories all the time, which is really, really nice.
I'm raising my hand over here because I'm in the same boat. And ever since taking Urolithin-A daily now for over 2 years, it has gotten into my head sometimes about, oh, Chase, you're not really working out that hard anymore because you're not sore. And when I kind of get analytical, I go back to I look at my old school principles. I look at my frequency, intensity, time, and type of training, and I'm like, no, I did the work. I did the reps, I did the frequency. I'm feeling great. I'm within kind of this happy range of body composition for my personal preference, and my biomarkers are great and all this stuff. Nothing else has dipped. But I'm like, why am I not getting sore anymore? And I'm like, oh, it's got to be the Urolithin-A. And I've shared this story with my audience before when I talk about Mitopure, and that's I did a personal test to really see if this was influencing me the way that I thought it was. And at the beginning of 2024, I went off of Urolithin-A for about 6 weeks. And when I tell you, I didn't oh my God, I'm dying, I feel like crap. It wasn't like that. But it was hands down one of the most noticeable changes in my baseline energy. And then in that window, I began to get more sore again. I began to really feel my workouts. And then again, I got analytical. Okay, Chase, you didn't start a new workout program. You didn't, try to kill yourself in the gym any more than you're already doing. In fact, if anything, around the same time period, beginning of 2024, my training frequency and intensity definitely dropped. Life, some other issues, and I was actually not training the same way that I used to. I was like, but okay, so if that's dipped, if I'm not working out as much, why am I getting more sore? Went back on Urolithin-A, no muscle soreness, raise the bar again in my daily baseline energy. So I think this is really worth noting that someone like myself, and I feel like a lot of people listening, watching this podcast, you're already regularly active. Maybe we're not all training for a competition or, high performing endurance athletes, professional athletes, something like that. But the Everforward Radio listener definitely cares about moving their body and feeling well and moving well for as long as possible. And so could you kind of shift gears and go that angle more for us? So we talked about how we saw significant improvements in a middle-aged sedentary group of people in terms of increased strength and endurance. This should matter more for someone like me, right? Someone like my audience member that is regularly active, has these peaks and valleys in their training, maybe through injury, lifestyle, whatever. I had an amazing experience with it. I still do. Why does it matter for someone like myself, and what benefits can we realistically see?
So, the benefits obviously, right, in just your day-to-day performance for sure, right? But mitochondrial decline and muscle decline, these things are happening as we get older, right? These things actually start in our 30s. And these were things I really wish I had known in my 30s and didn't, I was a cardio queen, and now I've really completely changed that to being much more of a strength training queen or princess. Maybe I haven't made it queen status yet. But I think for people that are younger, either like early middle age or just even younger than that, right? These are the things, it's almost like, it's almost like your investment fund, your like 401k of your mitochondrial health. If you are building up this bank and helping to just keep your muscles and in a healthy state when you're younger, the hope is these activities that you're doing today are going to make a difference 20 years down the line.
I'm here to tell you, once you cross over your 30s, you should care a lot more just about maintenance. What's the best way I can say this? I feel like my training in my 30s, my mid to late 30s, honestly, has been so focused around muscle maintenance, body composition maintenance. And yeah, I cannot speak enough about that.
Absolutely. I agree. And, the interesting thing about Urolithin-A is what we're seeing, though, also is we did that study in middle-aged adults. We now are looking at it in terms of performance in younger adults, but we also did a study in older sedentary adults, so people who were 65 and older. And that was another, randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial that was with a higher dose of 1,000 milligrams of Urolithin-A. And in that study, that these again were sedentary, average age 70. And what we saw was that in this group, the muscle endurance was also increased. And with 1,000 milligrams after just 8 weeks, so just after 2 months, we saw a 17% improvement in muscle endurance. So this is something that I really believe wherever you are on the age spectrum, like we haven't tested it in children, so I would not go there in terms of like people under age 18. But, I think anyone who's in their like 20s, 30s, all the way up to, there was somebody who was 90 in that study. And it's interesting, our chief medical officer talks about, our studies are blinded, so we don't know who is getting what. And he talks about this one woman who was in her 90s, and she was like, I'm sure I'm on the supplement. I'm sure I'm not on the placebo, because she was a big gardener, and she was like noticing that she had so much more energy and was like able to be more active in her garden. And then when we unblinded the data, it turned out like, yes, she was, right? So any age can potentially feel a benefit from this, because our mitochondria, they're not just like static at one point in your life. They're something that they are constantly recycling. They are constantly being utilized. They're giving our cells energy. If we have daily stressors when we're younger, it can help us feel more, resilient to those daily stressors. And then of course the decline that's happening as we get older, it can help to kind of counterbalance that and slow some of that decline down.
Yeah, there was another study, again, I'll have it linked in the show notes, that I found from the the NIH, the National Library of Medicine. And this was, I'm trying to find the date, but it wasn't that long ago. I believe it was 2023. And it was talking about the pharmacological effects of Urolithin-A and its role in muscle health and performance. And to your point here, talking about maintaining muscle, it shows that Urolithin-A exhibits diverse biological activities encompassing anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, anti-tumor, and anti-aging properties. And then in terms of muscle health, evidence suggests that Urolithin-A promotes muscle protein synthesis and muscle growth through various pathways, offering promise in mitigating muscle atrophy. So there's the science version of what we just talked about.
Yep.
Is there a type of person or an age group of person that you feel would have the most benefits from prioritizing their daily wellness routine, supplementation, diet with Urolithin-A, or is it pretty universal across the board? Do we reach any kind of saturation point, or do we need to really wait until, biologically speaking, we're seeing that natural dip in mitochondrial health and revitalization? So maybe, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, because sometimes with supplementation specifically, we're taking something unnecessarily. We're taking something that our body is already pretty good at, or just through daily activities, sleep, diet, things like that, it can stay the course. So is there anybody that this might not best serve, or getting ahead of the curve, so to speak, with Urolithin-A? Are you only going to be enhancing muscular strength, endurance? And then, of course, we're seeing more promise for longevity.
So a couple of thoughts on that. So the first thing is our studies, and I'm not talking about that one on endurance athletes because that's not published yet. So our published data, the youngest really is in that we've seen, we're in our 40s. So when we look at like actual clinical data, which is I think where we have to start before we start talking about like, you know, what clinicians might be doing with their patients or what somebody might be doing for themselves. So the clinical data really, like the youngest is in their 40s. And I think honestly, that is probably the bulk of people that start looking at this, because I think it's at that point in people's lives where they're either seeing their parents go through the aging process and they're really kind of trying to clean up their act, or they're noticing sort of their own, not healing the way that they used to, or their energy is low, or they're not recovering. So that's usually, I think, sort of the sweet spot of where people are starting, and I think would be a great place. But that's based on the research. But I think as we think about how we know that the cellular processes and the muscle processes that happen in aging happen at a younger age in our 30s, there is really a case that could be made if you start doing these things at a younger time. There could be a benefit. We just don't necessarily have the research to back that up. The other thing that I think is important to say is, a lot of like the role of a dietary supplement, like, and outside of people who are using like either in like the biohacking community or kind of like using it, like using dietary supplements to really like rev up what you're doing, right? My thought on dietary supplements is they're meant to be a crutch for things that are missing in your diet, right? That you can't get in your diet. So vitamin D, for example, right? Most people are deficient in vitamin C, especially vitamin D, sorry. We're not getting out enough in the sun in the winter months. We don't get enough from food. We should take vitamin D. Urolithin-A is similar in that sense, because remember we talked about the fact that it's a postbiotic. So we need our gut to make it for us. However, we have studied various populations around the world at this point, and the vast majority of people don't have the right gut microbiome to make it. And even like we worked with, some practitioners like doctors and who are doing like everything they possibly can to have a healthy gut, and they don't produce Urolithin-A, where you have the ability to test this. And I think, the reason for that is twofold. Like I know myself, for example, I'm very conscious of gut health and making sure that I'm eating a rich diet and, polyphenols and fiber, but I was a bottle fed baby and I was a C-section baby. So at the beginning of my life, like I just didn't get inoculated with all the goodies that I should have. So most people aren't making it. Even if they think they have a healthy gut, it's really only about 30 to 40% of the population has the gut microbiome to make it. And even if you do have...
But this is something that we can make. That's an important point to make. I don't think I was clear. That's my mistake. This is something, Urolithin-A, the body can naturally produce it. But if I'm hearing you correctly, even despite best efforts, sometimes we are not in the most ideal gut microbiome situation to be able to produce it at all, but also be in enough quantities to get these benefits we're talking about, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
So, what I had mentioned, we have these little critters, these microbes that live inside us, only a select few of them are the Urolithin-A producers. And if you don't have any of that particular strain, you're not going to get this. And we don't know what strain makes it. So we can't even say like, take this probiotic and you can bypass it. The other thing that we've seen in our studies, so the dosing that we've talked about for these effects that we've seen on muscle is 500 or 1,000 milligrams. And in order to get a therapeutic, like, so if you have the right gut microbiome and you can produce it, you'd actually have to have 6 cups of pomegranate juice to get that same therapeutic effect of a 500 milligram dietary supplement. And that's
now my in-laws would love to hear that, because they're Persian and they put pomegranates on everything, and some of them might even be pretty close.
Yeah. I'm always curious about populations that just traditionally eat a lot of pomegranates, if they tend to be better producers.
A lot of pomegranates
than
and walnut oil, because I know we can get Urolithin-A from walnut oil as well, correct?
You can get. So your gut can make it from the polyphenols in
there.
It
is. There it is. Okay.
Yep. So that's the key thing. It's not directly available from food. So we're relying on our gut to make it from what we eat. So that's where it gets
Maybe
a little
here's a new
tricky,
clinical trial for you guys, pulling samples
Yeah.
of, who creates the most amount of natural urolithin-A. I'd be really curious to see if, a Middle Eastern population has naturally occurring or higher levels at least of urolithin-A naturally.
We might know that. I'll have to do some digging. So I know we've checked like different populations, like the US and Canada are the worst producers. No shock there because most of us are not, and we're testing like the general population, right? So most of us are not eating a very like gut healthy diet. We're not eating enough of the dietary precursors. I think France has a higher amount of producers. Interestingly, I suspected that India would have a high amount because they eat such a polyphenol rich diet. They're not great producers. And our chief medical officer, who's Indian, he believes it's because they use antibiotics so frequently to help, like when kids get
so they're
sick.
killing the microbiome.
Yeah. So I think that would be really interesting to look at. I'll have to get back to you if we've looked at Middle Eastern communities and see.
Yeah, I'd be curious. And then I wonder for the French population, is it because assumption here, the higher consumption of alcohol, red wine?
I don't know.
Or is there anything else
because
in the French diet?
I think it's just, again, it's more of like a whole food based diet. Maybe it's the red wine, but I think alcohol can potentially negatively impact the microbiome too. So I don't know. I think it's more just on like a lifestyle and, just whole food type of thing. We didn't really study the why, just more the who and what we're producing. But I will put a note to look at the Middle Eastern culture because I think that's probably would be interesting to know.
Which brings me to my next question. Is there a test for us? Can we get a lab test, a biomarker test to go, hey, I want to know, do I have urolithin-A and at what quantities? So I know if I should focus on, all right, I need to revamp or increase my gut microbiome to bring up these levels of urolithin-A, or should I consider supplementation? Is there a test for urolithin-A?
So we have a test that's part of our clinical trials. As we can put the link in your show notes. I think it's like challenge.mitopure.com, but don't quote me on that. And what it is you sign up and there's no cost because you're part of our clinical trial. And what we do is we send you 8 ounces of pomegranate juice. It's a little like finger stick dried blood spot. We send you pomegranate juice, you drink that, you take the little blood test. Then you take Mitopure, you do the same blood test, you send it back to the lab, and we'll show you is any urolithin-A in your blood after the pomegranate juice and how much is in your blood after you take the Mitopure. So you can do a little bit of a comparison. It's not going to tell you your gut is healthy or not. It's not going to tell you like you should have more, probiotics. It's just going to say like, do you have the ability to convert pomegranate juice into urolithin-A at all? And then, again, even if you can convert into urolithin-A, you'd have to have those 6 cups of pomegranate juice to get your blood levels to the same as what you'll see after you take 500 milligrams of urolithin-A. So it's
now drinking 6 cups of pomegranate juice a day. Would you advise?
No.
Are there any downfalls to that?
It's
all natural, right? It's just good juice, but we're talking a lot of naturally occurring sugars, but sugars nonetheless.
There's like 30 grams of sugar in a cup. I would say that's a definite no, right? I can't think of a single instance why I would want someone to drink 6 cups of pomegranate juice a day. I love pomegranates, eat them. If you want to have, some pomegranate juice, that's fine. But for your urolithin-A, I suspect like the sugar damage that would happen from having, 6 cups of pomegranate juice a day probably outweighs any benefit that you're going to get from, this is one of those things, I think there's an argument to be made that if you are a producer and you have a robust production when you do this test, and you do eat a lot of, it's walnuts, pecans, it's not just pomegranates, it's dark skinned berries, and you have a diet that includes a lot of those every day, could you get away with like 500 milligrams instead of 1,000 dose, or potentially even 250 milligrams? Maybe. I think there's an argument that could be made, but I would not want someone to drink 6 cups of pomegranate juice every day. Yeah. Fair point.
I would love to shift into dosing and time, actually, if we could, with urolithin-A. So like I said, I looked at my episode actually with the co-founder of Timeline, Chris Wrench. He was on the show back in January 2023, episode 670. I'll have that linked for everybody in the show notes as always. And so it was about 2 or 3 months before that I started Mitopure. So I have been, quite literally probably this month as we're recording, October 2024, now at, if not a little bit over, 2 years of daily urolithin-A consumption through Mitopure. And up until last week, I've just been doing the daily dose, 500 milligrams of Urolithin-A. But actually, through talking to a few other people, some wellness homies in the field, they were telling me, oh no, like we're seeing actually even more unique benefits in terms of feeling, performance, recovery, improved health benefits overall by taking it more in a fasted state, first thing in the morning, and even doubling the dose. So I've been doing that. So up for the last 2 years now, up until now, I have been taking it more or less in the morning when I kind of take my other supplements, but it's usually around my first meal with some calories, with some protein, a little bit of fat, or a whole meal. And so now what I'm doing is I'm taking double the dose. I'm taking 1,000 milligrams of Urolithin-A first thing in the morning with water in a fasted state. And I'm curious, other than just kind of my self-test, what unique benefits do you think someone could see from taking Urolithin-A in a fasted or non-fasted state and the 500 milligrams versus 1,000 milligram dose?
Let's start first with the 500 versus 1,000 and then go into the timing and fasting. So we've done studies with 500 and 1,000 milligrams and do see significant benefits with both. It appears that when you go to that 1,000 milligram dose, you are getting sort of a more robust benefit, and the benefits seem to happen a little bit faster. And that's for muscle. But the study that I sort of mentioned, talking about...
Sorry, muscle, what do you mean
strength,
specifically by muscle? Muscle strength?
Muscle strength
Okay.
and endurance,
Okay.
yeah. We are now starting to shift some research into some other areas, right? So we're starting to look at immune function, for example, right? Our immune cells are, also energy dependent from our mitochondria. And so we just finished a study, which I'm hoping should be published pretty soon. This was healthy middle-aged adults. And we did this deep phenotyping of almost every single immune cell that's in their body. And that was an 1,000 milligram study. After 1 month, we saw these robust improvements in mitochondrial function, mitochondrial number in these immune cells. The immune cells, we had more of the types of immune cells that are these early scavengers of disease and infection and even cancer. They were more metabolically active. So that was at 1,000 milligram dose. So I think the question is also starting to become like, what's your goal by taking your Urolithin-A? What that recovery study also with the endurance athletes, that was also a 1,000 milligram dose as well. So here's how I look at it. I personally take 500 milligrams. I'm sort of a middle-aged, healthy, physically fit person. My parents I have on 1,000 milligrams because they are in a greater state of mitochondrial decline. When I'm traveling, stressed, or like revving up my training for some reason, I boost it up to 1,000. But on sort of maintenance dose, I take 500 as sort of like my regular dose. Now, somebody who is not active and maybe is looking again to like get some support as they start some exercise routine, 1,000 might be a great place to start and then scale back to 500. So people are playing around with the dosing. And I think as we study this more and more and look at other areas where it can potentially help, right? Like, if we're looking even at things like potentially brain health down the line, right? There might be different doses that are going to be better for different systems in the body. But I think the average person, 500 milligrams is a great place to start. Notice if you have any benefits. If you are still not feeling it, go up to 1,000. Or if you're somebody who's really struggling with fatigue, brain fog, something like that, and you need a little bit more oomph, start at 1,000 and then maybe scale back to 500. So I think that's how people can play around with it. Now, in terms of fasted, not fasted, our studies were all done fasted in the morning, but we've also, the studies that have looked at like blood concentrations of Urolithin-A, those are done on people who are not necessarily fasting at different times of day. So we are seeing that the body is still getting saturated with it no matter what time of day that you take it. I do know some of the people that are really like into sports performance are sort of timing it around either their workouts or it peaks in your bloodstream at around 6 to 8 hours. So they're kind of timing it with that. For me personally, that is...
I didn't know that part, really. So when you take it 6 to 8 hours, you have the most concentration in your bloodstream. You have the most readily available.
That's when it's kind of peaked, which is why some people are even considering taking it at night, because then you get into like more autophagy or mitophagy overnight. For me personally, and the vast majority of people that I like work with, that is overcomplicating it. Like, I think
we're getting too in the minutia here, really, for general purposes.
Like the time of day that you're most likely to remember to take it is the best time of day to take it, right? Like, To be honest, like I've had some people tell me that they take it at night and they feel actually more alert in the morning when they get up. So I started trying to take it at night. I forget to take supplements at night. Like I just don't. I take them in the morning and I was
Yeah.
like, forget it. I've now skipped it like 3 days in a row. This is not worth it for me.
Well, to your point, if it is 6 to 8 hours later, we're having peak concentration in our bloodstream. If you take it before you go to bed, most people, if you're getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep, that is probably why, would you assume, when you wake up, or
yep.
these people, they're feeling better?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And maybe if you're someone who works out in the morning, maybe then that makes sense to take it at night. And I think this is just people are experimenting on their own. We don't really have any science to back this up. As I said, we just, for simplicity of a protocol, we just say it in the morning, fasted. But it also doesn't matter if you're fasted or not. Your body's going to absorb it, whether, because we actually have it as a soft gel. So there's a pill form. There's also a powder form that's meant to be mixed into food. I mean, that's the design of it. And they both have the same bioavailability and the same efficacy. So it really doesn't matter if you take it with or without food. It won't break a fast. The food-based one obviously will, but the soft gels,
Right, yeah.
it won't break a fast. But I haven't seen any like strong evidence that, it has to be done fasting. You can absorb it. The gut is primed to absorb this because the gut should be making it on its own, right? It doesn't need any sort of like other carrier molecule to get it in.
Okay. So then it kind of begs the other question of, well, if 500 gives us all these, traditional benefits, 1,000 is a little bit more for acute application, high stress, higher training. Maybe you're someone who's super low energy, not quite in a regular routine with, training or healthy habits. What about 1,500 milligrams? What about 2,000? What about cycling on and off, or cycling high dose, low dose?
So we have tested higher than 1,000 milligrams, and the benefits seem to plateau at that. You kind of just get saturated. So there doesn't seem to be any safety concern with taking more, but there just really doesn't seem to be any benefit. So, why do something if there's no benefit to that, right? Like we already taking so many supplements and pills. Like I don't see any reason to take any more.
Save
than
your pills, save your
milligrams.
money.
Yeah, exactly. But people are, as I said, we don't have the studies to back this up, but people are playing around in the head with like cycling, maybe doing 750 milligrams instead of 1,000 milligrams, trying to kind of like stretch out their order and play around with that. And I think if you are doing that and you feel a benefit, that's great. I think if there's benefits at 500 milligrams and there's benefits at 1,000 milligrams, like we don't have the clinical data to show there's a benefit at 750, but I would imagine there are. It might not be statistically significant, but I think people can play with that and with their own sort of lifestyle and their own regimen. Or if you're a healthcare practitioner and you're kind of working and coaching somebody, I think those are the things that you can use your clinical judgment and play with. But the clinical data is at 500 milligrams and 1,000 milligrams.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me here is really the underlying importance of know thyself, know your baseline. And I don't know if I said this when I was talking about when I started doubling my dose recently, this past 1 to 2 weeks. It's because I'm very aware of, what I'm doing, what I'm not doing, season of life. And where I'm at right now is I'm in another dip of my training frequency. I'm in another dip of my just ability to know for sure that I have as much control over my daily health variables as I would like. And what I mean by that is I've been in a heavy travel season. I'm talking bi-coastal multiple times a week. I'm talking weddings. I'm talking life stressors, getting into the holidays and, business growth and all this stuff. And so there's a part of, I think, anybody that can relate to that and go, oh my gosh, life is crazy. I'm living in chaos. I can't. I can't keep up. I can't train, or I can't make the healthy choices that I want to make when it comes to my diet. Now, there's a lot of information in that, and we can get stuck in the I can't, or life is too crazy right now, or go, oh, okay, all right. Because of what is going on, I'm still going to try to hold as many lines as possible in my, wellness habits. But for whatever reason or reasons, I just can't quite keep up with what I want to do, what I like to do for me. So what can I do about that? and which is why I'm leaning heavily into increasing my dose of Urolithin-A and a few other manipulations in my diet and especially supplementation, because, all right, I need to really focus on immune health. I need to really focus on protein consumption and maintenance calories so that I don't lose muscle mass, that I don't atrophy, that I don't, go back into the gym and I'm like, oh man, I got to really drop my weight, drop my reps, because that is just a slippery slope into, that unreal or that non-ideal routine becoming your new norm.
For sure.
And I know that that's how it starts, from personal experience in my years in clinic as a health coach. I can't tell you how many times I would sit down across the table from somebody and go, like, oh, Chase, I blinked and it's been 5 years, 10 years. And like, I just haven't gone to the gym, or I blinked and I'm 20, 30 pounds overweight, or I just, it hurts. My back hurts to bend over to put on my shoes or play with my kids. And I know right here, right now, this is where that begins. And so Absolutely. I'm taking all those data points and just going, all right, what can I do to hold the line as much as possible? And also lean on the things that I know that already work for me. Again, know thyself. I know that these rituals, these routines, this key supplementation adds a lot of value to my life. So let me just double down on some of the things that I know work. And it's even greater because with Urolithin-A, I can double down based on personal experience, but the 10, 12, almost 15 years now, pushing 15 years of clinical research, human clinical research. So that's just, kind of my personal soapbox rant about it. But, I think anybody can hear that and relate. Don't get defeated. Don't allow yourself to become defeated. Lean into the things that that work, and just give yourself grace for the season of life that you're in, and just, revamp a couple things.
I love that, right? I think we all have to respect the season of life that we're in, and everything can't be perfect all the time. That's just life, right? And that's why we train the way that we do and we eat the way we do, so we can be resilient and bounce back to these things that, these curveballs that life gives us, and know that there are tools to help bridge these gaps. So I love what you said. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, again, personally speaking, I'm someone who's been strength training active for, his whole life, but, really, I'd say really daily, probably the last like 15, 20 years. And it almost like doesn't make sense how I'm able to keep my current body composition. Because again, I know my frequency training, style, intensity, time, and type. I know that, that hasn't been as much as I would like. I know that my diet has slipped. Man, these days I'm ecstatic if I can hit 100 grams of protein a day. I have training, I have education. I also have a lot of years of personal experience. And I know that these are the things that humans across the board have to do in order to maintain muscular strength, endurance, body composition. Now I'm probably running, I'd say 3 to 5 pounds more body fat that I personally like to run at. But in terms of just my frame, my size, my muscle mass, it doesn't make sense. And I am not taking any performance enhancing drugs. I was on testosterone replacement therapy almost a year and a half ago. And so, that might be an explanation, but I'm not doing anything else. And for me, it keeps coming back to, all right, what are you doing? What does the science say? And Urolithin-A, I feel like, has been one of, if not the biggest contributing factors to helping me keep a healthy body composition, a preferred body composition that doesn't send me spiraling mentally.
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't know that there's like science to necessarily like link those two things, but here's my thought process, right? If your mitochondria are more metabolically active, right, and they are converting this food that you eat into energy for your body to use and to be fuel, that makes sense. The other thing that I think that's so important is, when you just are feeling better, right? So even if you're not exercising the way that you want and you're not eating the way that you really like want to, but you still are fueling your cells with as much, nutrient dense food as possible, and you're getting your Urolithin-A, and you just have better energy through the day, it is easier to make the most of the little windows that you have to eat well. That's one of the things I notice with myself is like, I call it like a subtle energy that I have where it's not like taking, caffeine, or like if you get a B12 injection and you get this like energetic boost. It's more like I just get through my day. I'm somebody who tends to work out at the end of the day. So I do a full work day. I work out. I make dinner, like, and I'm not crashing. And so when things get busy, you can be more mindful. You're not just like reaching for like, or going through drive-through or like reaching for like the junk that's in the fridge. Like you still have the energy to make the most of those smaller windows of time that's crazy and stressful. So I think there's a
Oh,
lot of things that go into that.
to have the energy to be able to make the best possible decision despite being out of your preferred routine is goals. I mean, that is where that's the wedge that starts in the slippery slope of you blink and you're 10, 20 pounds overweight, you're chronically inflamed, poor sleep, all the things I just talked about. So, I mean, I think that's such an important point to drive home
Yeah,
right there.
we're sort of changing gears a little bit, but I'm putting my health coach hat on for a second. But I think like sometimes people look at fitness and nutrition professionals and are like, you're perfect all the time. That's this perception. And
No.
we're not at all. I think one of the things that is different is that we are more tuned into, though, when we're slipping, reining that in and finding tools that can help us, A, have grace with ourselves, and B, just make these smarter decisions that aren't going to have us snowball, right? I mean, there's been nights where I'm like, I had ice cream for dinner tonight, guys, like not proud of it, but like did it. And you know what? That's gone. And the next day, like I'm back to my routine. And I think is sort of the difference is that we have really honed in on that skill set of resilience and have tools that help us make decisions that don't snowball as quickly.
So true, so true. And what we're kind of talking about here brings me to my final question, Jen, and that's the mindset component of taking care of yourself, your health span, your lifespan, and where the mind goes, the body will follow. And the last question I ask everybody, or a question I ask everybody on the show here, is ever forward. Those two words. What does it mean to you? If I were to ask you, what does it mean to live a life ever forward? How do you live a life ever forward? What does that look like to you?
So to me, I think thinking ever forward, and this is something I think a lot about as I get older, right, is how can I keep doing as much of the things that I love that bring me joy for as long as possible ever into the future, right? And whether it's, I've come to a place where I actually like love working out, whereas in a much of a younger stage of my life, it was much more of like a weight control issue. Whereas now I do it for the joy of moving my body and just how I feel when I do it. And so that's, I think, the biggest mind shift, that I've had is finding things that bring me joy that also happen to be good for me and finding that perfect marriage of them and giving myself a lot of grace, kind of as we were talking about, that life is not perfect. Life throws you snowballs or curveballs, I should say, and being really resilient to those things and thinking a lot about, we talked a little bit about like the things that younger people can do to set themselves up. Like I think about that a lot. Like where do I want my life to be at in, like, cause I hope I'm going to be here in my 70s, 80s and 90s. Right. And what are the things that I'm doing today that are going to help me live the best life, not only now, but into the future as well?
Never a right or wrong answer. I appreciate everyone's interpretation. Jen, I'm going to have all of your information and all the science and studies that we talked about in the show notes for everybody. And it's been a true joy to get to work with Timeline these last 2 years. I've had an incredible experience using MitoPure, the product with Urolithin-A here from Timeline Nutrition. And again, we've got a great partnership with you guys. And I'm going to have all that linked down in the show notes for everybody. But if you want to learn more about why I love it, the science behind it, all the things, you can head to timelinenutrition.com/everforward. We got a great discount for you to check it out. And I also know, we haven't really talked about it, but talking with other members on the team, I know you all are expanding the lineup soon, having some different offers, some different products, and just even more amazing, more economic, different applications, just different types different ways to get your Urolithin-A into your body so that everyone can get these benefits. I've loved using this, and I'll say it one more time. If I could only pick one supplement to take for the rest of my life daily, it would be MitoPure. It would be this Urolithin-A product.
I love it. You made my job super easy.